Hello, everyone. How are you doing? Thanks so much for tuning into today's masterclass session. As you can see, I'm alone by Hayden Barnes. Hayden, do you want to say hello?
Hello, everyone. My name is Hayden Barnes, and I'm the engineering manager for Windows on Rancher. And I am joined today by members of our team, and I'll introduce them in a few minutes. We just want to give everyone a chance to get in.
Absolutely. So I hope you've been counting down in anticipation for this session. I know I have. I don't have a lot of Windows-based container experience, so I'm very keen. Also, once again, you know that we have weekly challenges for each of our master classes, so you want to pay close attention so you can get as equipped as you can for that. If you missed it, just scroll up in the chat. Hayden actually shared some resources over there. We'll probably paste them again, just so that you can have that available to you. And we've already released a poll, so please do check that out. And if you look at the bottom right, you'll notice there's ask a question and poll. So please do check out that poll. We just want to get some insight to see what level of experience you have with working with Windows containers. That'll be really useful to Hayden and the rest of the team as well, and also good for us. We can obviously make use of that insight in terms of making more content available other than just a masterclass session, even though this is definitely going to be something epic. There's some cool stuff that the team have lined up for you. Also, one of the most popular questions, if not the most popular, is whether or not the session will be recorded. And the answer is yes. This session is being recorded, and it will be available to you on demand afterwards. So all you'll have to do is access this exact same link and go to your past events, and you'll be able to access it. So don't worry about it if you're busy doing something else. If maybe you're trying to multitask, whether it's cooking dinner, if you're, depending on your time zone, or maybe you're making breakfast, or you're in the middle of debugging or something right now. But yeah, don't worry about that. You'll still be able to reference it and go through it in detail. Okay. Well, we're going to start shortly, so I'm just going to introduce myself. My name is Lukonde Mwila, or Luke, and I'm a senior technical evangelist at the SUSE and Rancher community team. And we're actually in the middle of a series called Cloud Native at Scale, and this is our third session. And the Cloud Native at Scale series is actually exploring the different dimensions of scaling in the cloud native space, and we've categorized it into 4 different dimensions. We're looking at cluster management at scale. We are looking at applications at scale, utilization at scale, and deployments at scale. This is the last leg, so to say, of the cluster management at scale space, and we think it's an exciting one to actually cap it off with. We're looking at Windows-based containers. .NET applications are extremely popular, and we've got a couple of milestones that are going to be introduced. I'm really trying to make sure I don't open the lid on some stuff. I don't want to be the one I don't want to steal anyone's thunder. So I'm going to leave that to Hayden to let you know all about those details, as well as his teammates. And we're looking forward to meeting each one of them, and they'll be introduced in a minute. So Hayden, I think you can take it away, introduce yourself and the rest of your team.
Sure. Again, my name is Hayden Barnes. I'm the senior engineering manager for Rancher on Windows here at SUSE. I'd like to introduce members of my team: Luther Monson, who'll be leading most of today's session, Jamie Phillips, and Ross Kirkpatrick. Let me start our deck for today, share that with you. We're very excited to have everyone, and I'm very excited to show off what my team has been working on and show that there. So welcome, everyone. I understand Windows containers is something new and different in Kubernetes. It's exciting for me. I'm a big fan of Linux, Windows, cross-platform compatibility and interoperability. And we're going to have a neat demo today of showing how you can run Windows workloads next to Linux workloads on our latest tech. So the agenda today will cover first Windows on Rancher, which will be an overview of Windows containers in general, if you're not familiar. Also their history within Rancher, because we've had Windows container support in Rancher since Rancher 2.3 on the RKE1 distribution. But then we're going to go into Windows on RKE2, which is the K3S derived distribution. And that is in tech preview in the latest version of Rancher, Rancher 2.6. So we're going to talk about how we're advancing Windows containers on Rancher with RKE2 and really approaching parity between Linux and Windows containers on the Rancher platform. We're then going to break for a quick Q&A just to cover any questions about Windows containers in general. Then we're going to go into a demo where we're going to actually show mixed Linux and Windows workloads on Rancher, live, how you would do that. And that will be a challenge with code that we're going to make available to follow up on. I'm going to pass on here to our team lead, Luther Monson, here in a moment to introduce Windows containers in general. They first debuted in Windows Server 2016, if you weren't aware, but have since come quite a ways. So with that, Luther, would you like to pick up?
Sure. So hello, everybody. Welcome. There might be some people who have been on my last masterclass about Windows and Rancher. That masterclass was on RKE 1, and we're excited to bring RKE 2 with our new launch of Rancher 2.6. We also have some support now with me, which I'd like to introduce a couple of guys who have been doing a lot of real good work. We do have Ross Kirkpatrick and we do have Jamie Phillips on board. And I'm going to do some quick hellos and how-to-dos. I'll start with me, just for anybody who doesn't know who I am. I'm Luther Munson. I am a staff software engineer here at SUSE. I am a Rancher engineer for 2 years, and then obviously came with the acquisition over to SUSE. And I am in charge of making sure the Windows and Kubernetes experience works out and does well. I am tech lead here with these two other guys. So let's start over with Ross and have him introduce himself real quick, and then we'll go to Jamie.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ross Kirkpatrick. I've been with Rancher and now SUSE Rancher for about 2 years. I actually started in the support organization, worked a lot on the Windows support cases with Luther, and now I'm a software engineer on the Windows team. Very exciting to have kind of made that full arc from supporting it to now working on it and designing it better.
Jamie.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jamie Phillips. I've been working with .NET and Windows for 14 years now in a professional capacity, and I've joined the team. I'm probably the newest member of the SUSE Rancher family. I started back in April when we formed this new team, and happy to be working on this and bringing some of my experience with what .NET developers are looking for and expect out of Windows.
All right, so now you guys have met up the teams. If you guys have questions for anyone specific, feel free to call that out because obviously we do have some varied experience here. Ross, obviously with some more support experience. Ross and I actually did a lot of the engineering support together for the last couple of years. We've been close friends for quite a while. Jamie obviously being a little newer here, but he is pretty good with the .NET side of things, and he's been helping us a lot, making sure we have a nice clean experience from the container standpoint. And Jamie also did a lot of work on the demo we had today. So maybe a good question to ask him about how some of that stuff works. Okay, so Windows containers, let's go kind of back to where it kind of started, and let's get just an overview here of what we had before and what we're going to be going to for 2.6 and RKE 2. So the container's been around for a while, since about 2016. Windows Server 2016 was supporting those, and all of that was via Docker EE. With the whole Docker process doing the enterprise, and Docker E is their enterprise offering, right? So Windows Server was where that all started in 2016. It matured considerably. So about 3 years they were working on it, got their Windows Server 2019, and then they started doing their SEC releases, which ended up having things we now know as Windows 1909, Windows 2004, Windows 20H2, and then we have now gotten to a point where there's Windows 2022. So they've now gone into another LTSC with 2022. So maturing considerably. There's a lot of things that we saw Microsoft do ourselves. They were improving the kernel. They were improving networking constantly. We were seeing bugs that we'd be working on with a customer, and we'd go back and talk a little bit to Microsoft about those things, and then we'd find kernel patches, and a patch release would show out, and all of a sudden those things would be fixed. So we saw them actively working on it, and things got really, really, really good during 2019. And then they patched the whole the SAC channels, made things a little complicated because from our perspective, there is a need in Windows to have the images built on the version of Windows that you use. It was a constant kind of struggle with how do you get what your infrastructure is using. If you're going to be on 20H2, like you now need all your applications to be on 20H2, right? So we had this sort of annoyance, if you will, where you had to have these images made on the kernel that was actually running the image ultimately, right? If anybody doesn't know, there's these 4 main versions here with Server Core, Nano Server, and then the main line, Windows and Windows Server. All the actual containers actually in Windows 10, if nobody's actually used it, it does do Windows containers pretty well. There's a Docker for desktop, for instance, that works perfectly fine, and I run every day for developing. So throughout that time, everything was maturing in the Docker world. Everything was looking pretty good. And now, as I said, Windows 2022 is going to be coming. A lot of what we're talking about is ultimately kind of been driven by the 2022 releases. There's things coming in Kubernetes 1.22, which is going to be very interesting. We'll have some pretty good conversations about that later. And then you'll see there's LTSCs, by the way, that's written here. There's 5 years of support now for those guys. And the new, if anybody missed the announcement, the new structure will be LTSCs, 2019s, 2022s. That's what we're talking about, 5 years of support. And then the Microsoft Container Registry, yes, of course. And then the big one that's coming for the Kubernetes world is host process containers. There is another problem with Windows, which was it never offered you host process and host network. So if anybody, for instance, knows how to run a CNI by hand, you would end up giving it host networking and on the Linux box, and he would take over and be able to make interfaces and do what he's supposed to do. You couldn't do some of those things in Windows. So the goal for the Kubernetes side of things, the upstream guys, have been working towards getting ourselves host process containers, which we'll go further into detail later. Next slide, I believe, Hayden, if you could. That's a lot of slides. I think you went too far. Let's go back. Go back. There we go. I think we're good here, right? Yeah, go one more. There we go. Okay, so this is just a little bit more about the nuances, and I would appreciate if anybody would like to just start asking questions if some of this stuff doesn't make sense, because it takes a lot of just doing it to get used to some of these things. So I discussed some of these things in the past, in the past slide too. So let's just go over some of the things that we know to be true. The Windows Server version has to match the image version, and I can say from experience that has had us doing a lot of very interesting things with our build hosts. We use a drone. We use a CI product called Drone. And we have to run, if we want images, for instance, of, let's say, our Rancher agent, we would need to run a build host for every version of Windows. So we would have to have a 2019, 2004, 20H2, et cetera. We'd have to have a specific host to build those images and then push those into Docker Hub, give them credentials, build the image, log it to Docker Hub, push the image, and we've now created a package of what we deploy as a product with Rancher. And it's a little cumbersome. It's a little painful, but again, it's the nuances, right? And then discussing host process containers earlier. that is also a nuance, which is you can't do host process containers, you can't do host networking. So we actually developed a tool that we like to call WINS, and it sits as a service on the box and kind of helps us get around some of those problems. WINS was a very big piece of what made RKE1 functional. So there was this service that ran on the box that helped, that you had a gRPC socket that you could mount into the container and make calls back into the host to do things for you. So there's a good example here, which is our monitoring tool has to read from the host. It has to read CPUs and RAMs and things like this. Well, he's only going to get those things if he has access to the box. So we have to run that on the host. So that would be something that you would call back into the host on and run, and then you can pull stats from it later. So again, the nuances. Once you know the rules of what you can and cannot do, you get to a point where you can start developing for things pretty easily. So the build pipeline, if anybody has any stories about their build pipelines with 20H2 and 2004 and how you've done your process, if you've been upgrading different versions of SAC, please, I want to hear some stories, maybe ask some questions or talk in chat. Because I'm sure there's a lot of weird things that have gone on with that. We had to build out a lot of, we found that people, like we were working with Drone, didn't have build hosts. They're getting released a 0-day. We're like, hey, we want to make a 2004 image. They didn't have any other stuff ready, so we would have to go through and do a bunch of prep work and get stuff working. It's all fun. It's all doable, right? It's all open source. We could grab it, compile it, make the images, and push them up, and we could use them. So we could get around it. But you find everyone running into these same exact problems, which is, if you want to provide support, which is these SAC channels, you have to make sure you have a pretty good, robust pipeline to do that. I think we can skip now to the next slide, Hayden, if you don't mind. Okay, so it was introduced in RKE. My last masterclass, you can probably go find it on YouTube. It was very much showing you how to use RKE1. If anybody still wants to use RKE1, go for it. Except for the fact that it only uses Docker. So I think everybody at this point should understand that Docker has a target on its back, and there's going to be a huge shift over to things running on Containerd. So Containerd is sort of the new future. RKE1 is so coupled to Docker that at the point of us actually, trying to rewrite it, it was easier to just start over. So RKE2 is basically the culmination of all of those things that happened. Hey, Containerd's coming. What are we doing with Docker? Well, let's start over. RKE2, by the way, for some history, started as a government project. It was used to be called RKE Government, and it was this FIPS compliant thing, and it did everything that anybody who wanted to run Kubernetes, who wanted to run hardened Kubernetes in a government cloud. And then that technology was all done with Containerd. Everything was ready, and we decided we're going to pull that more mainstream and end up with Windows support, which is how we got here. Is RKE2 was already working pretty decent as a Linux product, and it was doing all the Containerd, it was doing everything. It had already done, it had done the lift and shift from Docker to RKE to Containerd. We'd done that shift, so we added additionally the Windows container aspect to it. So we got embedded with the RKE2 team for about 6 months, and we started making all that stuff functional, and this is now why we're having this conversation. So RKE1, it came out into Rancher 2.3. And then now we have Rancher 2.6 here with RKE2. This is technically a tech preview, so please just submit bugs, etc. We are not actually labeling RKE2 GA. As you can see here on the right-hand side, it's anticipated early 2022. But as you're about to see, we have clusters, we have things working. We're tuning up the experience, fixing some of our apps and things, and we'll be in a good place. So the maturing section right here in the center, we did a lot of work to make Windows the Windows apps that we provide work. So if anybody doesn't know the Fleet product, maybe go look at Rancher/Fleet and take a look at what it actually does under the hood. But just for reference, the Rancher agent, okay, that's the Rancher, the agent that we install inside your cluster downstream. He communicates back to Rancher and tells us everything that's going on downstream. That is all matured, ready to go with Windows. We had all versions of Windows working on that, and we'll be looking forward here to some 2022s. So Fleet is another product that is now embedded in Rancher 2.6. Showed up in 2.5, but it's now embedded in 2.6, and you can go see what that does. Rancher/Fleet, github.com, Rancher Fleet. And that now also supports Windows fully. So we started adding all these kind of tools, and we had the build pipelines, as I already said, so we could add to these tools, our build pipelines, make the images, make these things function, because we could just add to our Helm charts and we could target things properly and build images and deploy them properly. And the tools will start working, because a lot of them are just network apps talking to, Kubernetes APIs, things like this. And, they make things, they function pretty well on any operating system. So alerting, monitoring, logging, alerting/monitoring V2 and logging V2, those are all Rancher apps that we provide. They're monitoring, they all make sense. Alerting and monitoring and logging should all make sense to everybody. That's a whole different story about how those things work. But just so you know, all those products additionally matured during the 2.5 era to all support Windows. We did a lot of work to do monitoring V2. That was a lot of fun. We ended up figuring out ways to get around some of the host networking problems and wins with the monitoring V2 product. So really cool stuff there. People have questions about that, please ask about it, because it was actually a lot of fun to work on. Okay, so as you see, looking forward, 2.6, this is where we are today. So the trick about 2.6 is Calico. We've 100% dug in on Calico as a CNI. We had RKE1 with Flannel. So Calico is doing some things that people like, and Flannel was not. So we have now gone to Calico. We still are going to probably bring in extra support for CNIs. Flannel is, I'm on the Flannel, I don't know what you call us, team, whatever. We're trying to upgrade some things and keep the Windows aspect involved in it, but it had fallen behind on a couple of things. So we're full in on Calico right now, and it is fully supported. We have Calico installing. We'll show you how that works. That's the biggest change from RK1 to RK2 is the Calico CNI support. And then 2.6 launched recently. If anybody has any experience with running it, please give us some feedback here. We have a lot of experience running it too. So if you have questions, there's a new UI. It's a lot of fun. So yeah, ask questions, ask in chat, or use the feature down below. Next slide, please, Hayden. Here we are. I've been prompting you to ask questions. So if we have anything out there, if we have anything specifically we want to talk about, let's go ahead and bring it in.
Hey, Luther. There are a couple of questions.
Let's do it.
Yeah, I'm going to take them from the top based on popularity.
All right.
I see Hayden and James are already answering some, which is cool. But while you're on screen, first question, one major requirement for running legacy Windows workloads in containers is Windows Authenticate, Kerberos. In K8, this is accomplished with GMSA accounts, but it's somewhat difficult to set up and not well documented for RKE-based clusters. Any plans to improve the documentation or update Rancher's UI to make GMSA easier to implement?
Yes, we've had a lot of conversations about GMSA. So there was also a promise of a GMSA v2 at one point. There's a without having to have those nodes on the Windows domain. Is that stuff, does anybody want to answer if that stuff's all good to go yet? I'm not sure I know the right answer at this exact second if the GMSA v2 was all good to go. But to answer the question about the Rancher point of view, the Rancher point of view is we fully support making GMSA super easy. We've had a lot of really good conversations about it, but it's just one of those things that we're trying to get the tech previews all done and ready to go to be GA, and it's going to come in and shim in right after that. So we're hoping to make it as simple as a Helm chart and put it in the App Store. That's the goal.
All right. Next question is for me. Do you think Windows containers have caught up to Linux containers? And what do you think were the main gaps that needed to be closed?
So yes and no. So, and by the way, fantastic question, because again, nuances in the Microsoft land. So the thing that I can say that frustrate me about Windows containers are like image size. Image size is pretty brutal. So in image, if anybody hasn't actually booted some of these things, like just always quadruple your disk space. If you think a Linux node will be fine with 32 megabytes or gigabytes of disk space, just times it by 4 and just put that for your Windows node because it's pretty bad. You're talking about base images that come down like server core, for instance, can be 5-6 gigabytes, right? So they put a lot of stuff, they pack a lot of things into the Windows containers. So I've always had a struggle with disk space. There's also a thing called Nano Server, which is smaller. It's like 150, 200 megs these days, but there's no such thing as scratch images. There's no such thing as a 10 megabyte Alpine. That doesn't exist. Now, I will say from things that I've seen tech previews from Microsoft on a beta kernel where they had a 10 megabyte image and it was beautiful. It looked really nice. It was basically about the same thing as you'd have with, say, an Alpine. It's not here yet, though. So I would say that disk space is a huge gap, and I feel confident that they're fixing it. The different versions of Windows having to build the images is also a pain point. Obviously, I think everybody knows that as long as there's a Linux kernel that supports and LXC stuff's all there, everybody just starts working, right? And it's just the underlying stuff is there. I really don't understand the technical reasons for why it has to be on the different kernels. I don't care. It's just way too nuanced for what I actually do. But it's a pain. And having different build hosts is cumbersome. It's a little bit of a pain to not be able to just target. Like if you're a Go developer, you can just target your operating systems and your architectures and just compile it on any system and you're good to go. That's annoying not having that kind of functionality, right? If you just have a Linux box and you just say, well, go build a Windows image at the same time, because this is my infrastructure is all in Linux, and let's just build the image and we'll just be done. Can't do that. It's just not a thing. You have to have the Windows host. You have to have the Windows sysadmins to be able to be there to help you. Like it's just not possible to not be able to just do everything in one place. I would love it if it was just multi-arch, multi-OS, just like how Go treats me, but it's not the case. Any other things I could think about gaps? Those are the worst. I think let's leave it at that. One last question.
Cool. Is it too much to give us we can get that 10 megabyte base image?
Is it too much or what? You broke up a little bit.
Okay. I was asking, is it too much to ask for a timeline of when we can get that 10 MB?
I don't know. I mean, I saw that beta kernel demo. They did it in the SIG. Yeah. They did it in the SIG maybe 3-4 months ago. I mean, you'd hope soon, right? I don't know.
Yeah. Cool. All right. The next question is from me again, but I'm going to skip it so I can actually ask the questions that the audience have. So the next one here is, what are the things I really need to learn more about with the nuances of Windows containers?
You just need to kind of be in it and just do it day to day, to be honest with you, because you're going to find something, you're going to be like, oh, I can't do that? Like, that's weird. Especially if you're a transplant from Linux, which is honestly most people are. Most people are doing the Linux stuff. They get a Kubernetes cluster up and running and they're good to go. And then they're just like, oh, but we have this .NET app that we should probably support. Well, here you are. And then you start learning the nuances, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, goodness gracious. And you learn things like host process doesn't exist. You learn things like host network doesn't exist, things like that. And then you're just like, oh, okay, how do I get around that? Well, so we were already there and we were already building around those things for you, right? So that's kind of why we have something like RK8 or we have RK2. We're trying to get around those problems for you so you can get used to it and develop using some of our tools. If you want to have your app use Wins, for instance, you could. Like, that's a thing. If you set it up,
I would also add that you should just expect things not to work.
You can start there too.
Because not all CNIs work on Windows. Not all storage works on a Windows node. And you have to kind of tease through what is supported and what isn't supported. And also, if you're just going to install a Helm chart that says it has Windows support, does it support all the versions of Windows you plan on running as your host?
Yeah,
that's the things you're going to have to know, because if you're deploying 2019, then it needs to have a 2019/1809 container image built, and if it's only building for 20H2 or Windows Server 2022, it's just not going to work.
Yeah,
and those are the types of things you're going to have to learn. You'll learn from experience, Luther was saying.
Yeah, I mean, you'll try to boot an app and it won't find any images, and it'll say it doesn't support the operating system, and you'll just be stuck, and you won't know why. And then you'll realize that somebody built it out, and they just built it out for one version of Windows, and they didn't care. They just didn't have the build pipelines.
And in true Microsoft fashion of making it easy for you to get started, Windows 10 kind of hides all that complexity from you, because you can pull anything and run the container locally. So then you build these things, you go to deploy, and you're surprised because it doesn't match and it doesn't work.
Yeah, they did some trickery so that you can do plus or minus like 2 or 3 versions, and it kind of fools you into some false sense of security, to be honest with you. But
Yep.
But yeah, nuances. I mean, seriously, like just ask the questions. Like we're here, you're here. Let's just get it out. Like just asking about what the nuances are. Like I can talk about some of this stuff for a while. It's like let's get some specific questions. No GUI support.
For a second there, I was thinking to myself, I hope you guys don't scare away people from actually trying out the challenge. So,
No.
Don't be intimidated.
No, don't be intimidated. And you're all here for a reason. Let's be honest.
Absolutely. Awesome. So I'm just going to go with one more question, and then we can defer the rest to right at the end of the session.
Let's do it.
Cool. So question I have over here is persistent storage working in Windows? What kinds of storage is supported?
Okay, so yes, and no, sort of. So there are some that should function just fine. Jamie, by the way, answered a little bit here too. So the CSI stuff's a little complicated, and we're still working on the testing process for RKE2 specific. Let's just talk about RKE2. We don't know for sure that all works 100% right now. So it should. There's plenty of work that's been done in that world where that stuff is fine. We just are not 100% certain that that's all working in RKE2 this exact second.
Fantastic. All right, thanks a lot. If they're great questions, people, please do keep them coming. We're still going to have another Q&A segment later, but to the team, you can carry on with the presentation.
Okie doke. Thanks for all those great questions. Let's move on to the next slide. So let's talk about RKE2. So Rancher 2.6 dropped a lot of crazy features, and I would be interested to hear from people who have already tried those. If you've booted 2.6 and you've tried to boot clusters, ask some questions, please. So 2.6 is live with a lot of interesting features that are wrapped around provisioning. I don't know if anybody knows what CAPI is. We did a lot of work to try to get ourselves into a cluster API sort of realm. And so while doing that, we additionally rebuilt our provisioning to support RKE2. So that was the big push for 2.6, was how do we get off of Docker and into Containerd? So as described earlier, Containerd seems to be the standard here, and we are now making RKE2 install, work with it always worked with Containerd, made Windows install Containerd, make it all work with Containerd, everything Containerd. It's basically what it comes down to. And the 2.6 provisioning was rewritten to allow for the RKE2 installation. And then the RKE2 installation gives you the Calico CNI, and then the RKE2 code itself, we migrated and upgraded into a Windows service itself, because it used to be, if you're running it in Docker, if anybody ran RKE1, you would do a Docker PS and you'd see a lot of stuff running there, right? So we wanted everything to be as a Windows service this time around. RKE2 actually acts more like acts more like a piece of, Linux software, Windows software now, after we upgraded it. Where you install it and you uninstall it. You use systemctl, right? And we use Windows Services Manager. That's kind of really what it comes down to. It's native Windows services written in Go. And we try to make that as seamless as possible so that you boot up an RKE2 Windows node, and here you are, you have a service manager that you would expect to run as it should, and everything's done for you, packaged and installed. Let's go to the next slide, Hayden. So very interesting. When I get to the demo, I'll show you how some of that stuff works. So let's go to provisioning v2, someone here on the left, right? This is sort of, so just so everybody understands, the RKE2 with Windows only works in Kubernetes greater than 1.21. So latest and greatest version, so please don't go try to install 120 or something before, that will not work. So make sure you're getting the latest and greatest stuff when you're doing this. This also accounts for if you do it by hand. If you go to the RKE2 website and you grab the by hand documentation and try to boot your own cluster, you just make sure you're doing 121. You can select what version when you're booting RKE2 and just make sure you're doing 121 plus. That's just number one. And then the new UI we really tried to make I'm not even going to talk about the new UI. I'm going to show you the new UI because that's a little bit more fun. But the new UI kind of revamped the old UI and made it more of a Kubernetes first UI. It's actually pretty fun. Okay, so the redesign of the Caesar Rancher 2.6 UI gives you Helm and multi-cluster management. That's all true. Let's talk about that stuff with the UI. Okay, let's go back to the containerd part with provisioning. So RKE2 will come out of the box with a runtime image that will give you containerd ready to go. We package it for you and we provide it for you. And it will come as in the installation process for RKE2 is a quick one-liner. That's how we wanted to keep it. In Rancher, it's additionally a one-liner. And it will go pull a runtime image, bring you every executable that you need. Let's talk about Windows specifically. All the EXEs that you will need to run will all come down prepackaged, and then we will install containerd for you, and we will make this all streamlined and super simple. So the idea was to make it so that you were only focused on a one-line installer, and everything came and was prepackaged for you to make things simple, right? We even give you a cry-CTL and some other things just to make things really nice and simple. Let's say you're on a box. You don't know where it is, but you're just SSH into it. You don't really want to do much more than to just possibly do a quick one-liner, right? So the containerd part of this was the installation part. It's just sucked in and taken care of. It's really neat. But the trick on provisioning in 2.6 Rancher, RKE2, the trick is that we've gutted all of the old taints and tolerations that we used to do in RKE1. So if anybody had an RKE1 cluster from before, you may have had trouble running Linux workloads at the same time as your Windows workloads because you had to tolerate a bunch of taints because we auto-tainted a bunch of things because the assumption back then was made that you wanted to only do a Windows cluster, period. That is not true. We have talked to many people and that has been a pain point. And the reality is everybody wants a cluster and they want to just add a Windows node. And that's what we've done. So with containerd, all standardized, with Calico, all standardized, all packaged up in a nice, neat little package that comes with a one-liner. We pull all those things down. We have our version of those things that will get pulled into your server. We boot them all up for you. Don't even have to deal with configuration. We have it all ready to go. And then you will get a cluster where you can now use node selectors and you can start choosing where you want to put your apps, where you want to put your services. And I'm going to show a demo, which will show you that pretty clearly. But the idea is now you just use your operating system selectors and you just decide where you want to have your images run. And you have a node that's sitting there. If you boot up a cluster with 121, with Calico, RKE2, you can just add in a Windows node, no questions asked. It's all set up for default so that all those things work. There's Calico settings that we default for you that we just take care of and you'll never have to deal with. So you can just make it work. It's pretty slick. And questions about that? Please, because it's a crazy way to do things. Next slide, please, Hayden. So as I said, the services for RKE2 are actually all native Go code. We actually took the RKE2 project and we updated it. RKE2 it extends a lot from K3s. And so we actually made K3s and RKE2 both compile on Windows natively. So that was part of our work, was to make things super simple. I actually develop on a Windows box and we were able to find problems and I just go build them right here. I can get the whole thing running. I can't really run the services all on Windows box because it's a crazy networking app that does a bunch of things that takes over your box. But I run everything I do is in WSL to boot for any of my Linux stuff. And then if I want to run stuff here locally with Windows, I just have it. So yeah, we're pushing very, very hard for native Go on Windows. So the upgrade process is a little sneaky, and if anybody has used the Rancher RKE1 upgrade process, it was pretty simple. You would go into a cluster and just hit a drop down. If you would pull our catalog in, you hit a drop down and select a new version, and then we would go into the downstream nodes and we would start cycling out the Docker containers. No different in sort of like how it works from the UI perspective, but under the hood, it's completely different now. So this just doesn't work today in 2.6.0, but we're hoping to get it for 2.6.2. But the idea is we have this thing called the system agent now, which works in RKE2. The new provisioning with Rancher implemented this concept. It's this new system agent who will sit there and recycle out the version of RK2 that's on the box for you based upon the version string, which is the similar concept. The version string ultimately ends up being what we pull from Docker Hub. We pull down our runtime image. We then recycle everything. And here's your new executable. Here's your new system service. Here's everything. So it's going to be almost identical for how that's going to work in Windows, except we're going to be reusing the Wins service that we have. The Wins service we use, as I said, for bypassing host process and host networking. We are going to also use that as the upgrader agent as well. So we already have that service there anyway. So we're going to add on to it, have an upgrader agent who's going to then get told via Rancher that there is a need to upgrade to a new version string, and he'll just pop out, grab the new images, and refresh, and you're done. And now you have a new version of Kubernetes running. So the upgrade process is pretty slick. We're pretty happy with it. And then the Calico part of this, yeah, so the BGP part doesn't actually work yet, but the VXLAN stuff is what we have with Calico. So the network policies piece is really what people were looking for out of Calico. If anybody remembers, we were pretty heavy on Canal for a long time, which is Flannel plus Calico's network policies. So now we just have Calico. So Calico has had all those features. Their Windows team is very nice. We've worked with them, and we like the support that we're getting from them on that. So yeah, Calico has been legit for us, and we have full Calico support, and we'll have that as part of the upgrade process when we run a new version of RK2. You can also get the version of Calico that comes with it as well, and we'll take care of it for you. Next slide, please, Hayden. Okay, so what is the future? Where are we going? I would like to take a look here over on the far right. That GitHub account, GitHub repo is where we do all of our work. So we're an open source company, we're an open source team. Leave issues there. Just go ahead and send us your feedback. That is where you can get our attention, and you'll have all of us be able to kind of triage and decide. It could be any Rancher product, any whatever. Like that's just a general bucket for Windows. But I can tell you where we're going on a couple of things because we have a lot of conversations about these things. As I was just talking about, seamless upgrades, working on that, trying to get that for 2.6.2. The Rancher apps themselves, we're actually upgrading a lot of the Helm charts and things so that and the actual UI experience around the Rancher app so that the catalog works a lot cleaner. Trying to make it so that if you are currently in a Windows cluster, then we don't try to show you things that'll never work, for instance, right? Because we kind of have an idea of what the apps can do. We know what the selectors are there, if they have images, et cetera. So we're trying to make that a better experience from a UI perspective and support all of our apps. And monitoring and logging are the two ones we get asked about a lot. Doesn't work right now, as far as I can understand. We're still getting all this stuff tech preview. Let's just be honest right now. The Rancher apps are still coming. So we're for sure working on Windows Server 2022. That part is going to be a huge undertaking for us because we do not, as I said earlier, we use Drone CI. Drone doesn't have those images yet. We have to work on a lot of those things. But when we get there, we're going to be super happy because 2022 has a lot of promise. We're very happy with what Microsoft has announced there. Host process containers are coming. That is also needs a container D update. And Kubernetes then has to support it. But the idea with host process containers is we should be able to upgrade RK2 to start running the CNIs in containers. That's our understanding of how it should work. We're hoping that's what happens. Right now, all of our CNI is done locally on the host. Right, we did that with RK1 with Flannel, with Wins, and now we're doing it with RK2 as a service that runs on the box. We boot as a sub-process Calico for you, right? We take care of it. And we would just then be able to run it as a container and have it inside of a static pod or something like this. So more CNI support. I do still want Flannel to work. I have a soft spot in my heart for Flannel. So, and Antria also works on Windows. There's discussions about it. Basically, if it works on Windows, we kind of want it to work. So more CNI. If there's a specific CNI that you think we should look at, pop a issue over on our GitHub. So that's the RK2 world. The Rancher world, first class UI support. As I was just saying over there about the Rancher apps, we want to make sure that the experience is, if you're in a Windows cluster, that you have the Windows things that you expect to see. So we were working with the UI team to make some changes there. We're really, really excited about the node pools. We actually really want to get this RKE2 work off of our plate so we can start working on provisioning Windows clusters with node pools. We want to be able to power them with node templates. We've been looking a lot into cloud-based init. If anybody remembers the rebuild of the vSphere driver, we switched over to cloud init 100% to boot up clusters. It was pretty successful and had a lot of really good feedback from that. And the cloud-based init direction is kind of where we want to head, with being able to boot up a cluster, give a node pool for your etcds and control planes and your Linux workers, and then just seamlessly add another pool, make it a Windows node, and hit ++ if you want another node, hit -- if you want to take away a node. Not sure where we want to get with Rancher. Okay. Next slide. I think we're probably going to demo now. Anybody has questions? Is there anything we should go through real quick? Luke, you've been probably triaging here. I want to just make sure I actually...
We could mention that Microsoft is making a heavy investment in Calico, and there's going to be some optimizations in 2022 for Calico, and they are working on eBPF support into the Windows kernel. So that's a lot of things if you don't know what that is, but if you look that up, that's going to be really cool things that are coming for Calico in Windows anyway. So
it is, yeah. Luke, any questions you want to knock off the list here before we move on?
Absolutely, yeah. I think we could just do like 2 questions and then we'll leave the rest for the end. So I have over here, sorry, can you highlight again the constraints and limitations to run Windows containers on-prem, preferably restricted or disconnected network?
Oh, so doing a air gap on-prem, is that kind of what I got out of that?
Yeah, Walid, you can confirm that.
Is Walid? I'm trying to read it myself. Like, kind of.
Sure.
Which one is from Walid, right?
Yep.
Sorry, can you highlight again the constraints and limitations to run Windows containers on-prem? I don't think there's any specific to running on-prem. Like, I'm not sure why that would be any different. But the disconnected network is a different story. I mean, if you're on-prem, you could still have network, right? So we, just so everybody's aware, that whole RKE2 was RKE government. A lot of the government stuff is air-gapped, and there's a lot of air-gap first functionality in RKE2, and we fully intend to have all that working with Windows. So if you were to pull, there's images that you would need to get into a local repository that you have access to inside your air-gap scenario, and then you can pull those. So again, we have this runtime container, we call it, which has everything you need. So if you have that in a registry somewhere that's local to the air-gapped server, you just grab it, pull it, and run it. So that's pretty much the design, was everything's Docker containers, or Docker images, I should say, and you then put those in a registry that you have access to in your air-gapped environment, and you can just pull them down and run them. So there's a lot of, I wouldn't say the constraints or limitations. There's a lot of code that we worked on to get around some of those constraints and limitations, right? We kind of understand that world. So Walid, I hope that answers your question. Sorry.
And I posted the link to the documentation for Windows Air Gap. So we have that up in the RKE2 docs now, because that's something that's there. Now, there are some hiccups with that currently in its current iteration that we are working through, and we are tracking some issues that have been reported around that. So, but know that will be there 100% fully by GA.
Good to go.
Great.
One more.
Got another question here from Walid, actually. What are the primary use cases where Windows containers are a must and regular Linux containers cannot satisfy?
Okay, so I hope everybody understands that you cannot have a Kubernetes cluster with Windows without Linux first. So I hope everybody gets that piece. You need to have a Windows control plane and a Windows etcd and a Windows worker. Like, you have to have all three, or else you cannot actually get the Windows node to connect. And the reason being is because the control plane, the API server, is not compiled and have a Windows version. The etcd's backends does not have a compiled Windows version. So you can't run any of those things on Windows. And then additionally, there's like core DNS and a couple other things that they just haven't really set up so that you can do just a Windows worker. You just have to have that additional Linux worker to do some additional functionality. So where a Windows container is a must, I mean, yeah, I guess, I mean, you're talking about people who are going to have your .NET apps, or you might have Windows on the edge. For instance, we hear a lot about people with their ARM64 Windows boxes running in the back of, Humvees or something like that. Like that's where it's a must. Like that's the people who we're talking to, is these guys who have they have a Windows setup. They like their Windows, and they have, I think another use case we've heard of is some oil rig guys who have trucks that they drive around, and they have a Windows box on every truck. There you go. And they want to run Kubernetes on it. Those are where Windows containers are a must, is that they already have boxes with Windows ready to go in their work trucks, and they want to run Kubernetes. There you go. That's where it's a must.
When it comes to apps, a lot of it's anything .NET full framework. So you can make a .NET full framework app run on Mono, but let's be real, that's got its own caveats. So if you're using ASP.NET Web Forms, which a lot of legacy apps are, a lot of CMSs in .NET still have web forms as part of there, and that would be a good candidate for something that's Windows containers specific. Or if you have a dependency on something in IIS, some feature where you need to run IIS, you're going to have to run that in a Windows container. Yeah. So it all really depends on your app. If your app can be ported and run on Linux, then that may be what you want to do. But if it can't be, then that's going to be your Windows containers. And it really comes down to you knowing your application and your requirements and documenting all that. Because some things may not run in a Windows container that's required for your legacy app, and you may not be able to containerize it. And that's the hard part of legacy apps is, knowing your app well enough to know, do you have to have Active Directory integration, or can you do LDAP? Because if you can do LDAP, then you can port it. But if you can't switch to LDAP and you have to have AD integration, then you have to run on a Windows container to get that. And that's just going to come down to your environment, your configuration, your app to know. But in general, anything .NET 4X, full framework, not .NET Core, will need to probably run in a Windows container, more than likely. So there's that. And then there could be some weird Java apps that use some Windows APIs that you need to run. And luckily, Microsoft has made this Windows base image now. It's just called Windows Container, which is 4 gigs. I think it's 4 gigs, right? And it's the full Windows API. And they've added that for a reason, right? They've added that for the people who have apps that require on those specific APIs to be exposed, to be able to run in a container. So it really comes down to knowing your legacy app to know right off the bat. But you can pretty much guess if it's full framework, requires IIS, requires the Windows API or Active Directory, you're going to need to be in a Windows container.
That's really helpful. Thanks a lot, Jamie. Great questions, Waleed. All right. Cool. So I will leave the rest for the end. So you can take it away with the demo.
Let's do it. Hayden, let's stop sharing. Thank you. And I'm going to share my full screen here, and hopefully I don't paradox you guys with try to minimize this thing as quick as possible. Okay, so please, can I get a confirmation verbally from somebody who's watching this that you can see my screen and everything's looking good?
Yep, looks good.
See your screen.
Fantastic. Thank you, everybody. Okay, so I have a couple of things lying around here. This right here is a Windows node booted in EC2. We'll get back to him in a little bit. I also have an Ubuntu node that's over here booted in EC2. So this is where we're going to get to, just so you know context of what we have here. This is a working cluster. Ignore this error thing. I'm actually running locally, and I have SSL search turned off and a whole bunch of other things. So let's not worry about some of these things because this is a dev environment. But let's go ahead and just look at what I have here. I have the new UI on Rancher 2.6 head actually. And you're going to have, so there's this new left rail menu, and there's your clusters here. Local cluster, as people may have remembered, is the place where we install Rancher. And we have some fun features here. I'm a huge fan. Just want to do a quick little shout out to the UI guys. We have this Control K feature here where you can just start searching for things. Pretty sweet. So seriously, pop into the new UI and take a look. Some of the stuff might be pretty fun for you. As you can tell, this is a Kubernetes first sort of API, and we show you everything. And we're trying a lot more. We do have this apps and marketplace, which is our Helm charts, which probably looks familiar to some people, but the rest of this is all Kubernetes objects. Well, I want to show you some basic functionality here, just so when I do some of these things, it doesn't confuse you. Here, for instance, is a service. I have the Kubernetes default service, right? If I go here, you can edit it, the config, edit as YAML. I think people remember some of this edit as YAML features from the old UI, but these are things I'm going to be doing, saving stuff. I just want to make sure people don't get confused when I poke around the new UI too fast. So this is the local cluster. This is where Rancher is installed. So if you see, there's a bunch of stuff in here, nodes, V3s, CSIs, these guys, all sorts of weird stuff, right? So we are going to avoid that. We're ultimately going to get to this cluster. This is just to show you what it looks like. This is a server, a worker, and a Windows node. So you can see here is a Windows node here. If you click into him, you'll see Windows 2019 standard. This is what we want. So how do we get to a point where we have a nice, working, healthy Windows cluster in the new UI and the new RK2 functionality? So first off is cluster management. This is a kind of the overarching everything that you have in your, all the clusters that you control via Rancher are going to be here. Here's the local cluster. Here's that Windows master class one I showed you. And then there's now create over here. And then if you come in here, you'll see a familiar screen. If you go back to RKE1, forward to RKE2/K3s. So this is old provisioning. This is new provisioning. So just to make that clear on what this is actually doing. If you click here and go into VMware, you'll see that there's going to be hopefully a familiar UI. This is basically iframed in for the old stuff. But if we go over here and we go to RK2 and we do a custom cluster, you'll see the new stuff. So this is kind of how you'd build out a cluster. Let me actually go back and do the vSphere one too, just to be nice. So yeah, I don't have this stuff set up, but you get the idea for how this was before. Enter in your vSphere stuff, go forward, and then it would ask you the questions for the node pool, the node templates, and then the node pools, and blah blah blah. This is now the new UI for that same functionality. And of course, in RK2, K3s, we have custom. Again, with RK2 and K3s, we only allow Windows nodes in custom. Like I said, we're working on the provisioning piece, and we hope to have it soon where you can just do a vSphere, or DigitalOcean doesn't actually support Windows, but we hope that these two, we can just have a quick node pool, plus, plus, minus, minus, and you have your Windows nodes. But for now, custom, here we are. And you'll see here drop down like before for the version of RK2 that you want to choose. Calico is our default here. If you choose anything else, it will not support a Windows node. So don't even bother right now with what you're looking for with the Windows. Yeah, if you're doing tech preview right now with what we're showing you, do not use the cloud providers with Windows right now. We're having trouble getting that working. Let's see over here. Nothing else to change, to be honest. We can just do a test cluster, give it a name. And by the way, I don't know if you noticed that, but this is all the defaults. If I hit create, I click custom, I really didn't change anything. It's already Calico. It's already the right version, 121. This is ready to go. So if I just type in test cluster and hit create, we have now created the bootstrapping that we will need to make our machines. So this is the new registration, the registration area. In the old UI, it looked very similar and but the registration actual command has changed considerably. This is now the system agent installer. So if you remember, I was talking about a system agent that sits around and processes upgrades for us. That's what this goes with first. The first thing we do is install the system agent. He then installs RK2 based upon what he was told to run via Rancher. Rancher takes the amalgamation, so to speak, of all the things that you asked for. If you go, I'll just do the YAML here. For instance, this right here, as I was saying, the Kubernetes version, very, very important. So it will take, Rancher takes these things, Kubernetes versions, et cetera, creates these things that we call plans. We pass those down to the system agent. System agent then installs RK2. I have already messed up the UI. So this is the registration, and I'm going to go show you how simple this is. This is a Ubuntu box. I'm going to select everything. I want to have all roles on one node. Just copy paste, go over here, copy paste. He's already pulled down everything. He's already started everything. I go back over here to machines and you'll see this guy booting up. And I don't know, shouldn't take long, but this guy's going to boot pretty quick. And if you will notice here, there is this Windows section right here. Currently, it's not allowing you to add any Windows nodes. Reason being is you don't have any Linux nodes first. As I said before, you need to have something with all three roles. And importantly, you do need a worker, right, for like ORDNS, et cetera. So once this node comes online, once he's provisioned, you will in fact be able to then have this section open up. But if we do a journal CTO, RK2 server, let's just follow what he's doing. So he's still running. He's trying to come up. I have high confidence that he will. But there he goes. Now, when we have this guy running, a node here that's got all roles, it's going to take a little longer to boot. I actually see RK2 worker nodes booting within 1 to 2 minutes. It's pretty fast. But you'll see what we have, this cluster API stuff going on here, all this machine craziness. And then we'll have our RK bootstrap information in here, and we'll have a node coming up here shortly. Come on, little guy. Anybody want to break the ice, ask some questions, do something?
Yep, absolutely. Gonna take one of the questions over here.
Yeah, do it.
Okay, and a question over here is, I'm fairly new to Kubernetes. Did I hear correctly that Docker is getting phased out to use containerd?
Yep, welcome to Kubernetes. That's correct.
Cool.
And that was announced with Kubernetes 121.
Yep.
That they were going to remove the Docker shim. So they've been using containerd with the Docker shim or the Docker shim for a little while now, but they've phasing that out at 121. So.
Awesome.
If anybody recognizes this from before, this is actually the same admission controller stuff that was happening on my other cluster. So this is coming here pretty soon. Go ahead, one more question, maybe, Luke.
Yep, sure. Any plans to get Longhorn volumes working on the Windows nodes?
You can go ahead and submit an issue to Longhorn/Longhorn, and you can tag Yasker, and you can tell him that he needs that. And you can have him come ask us, because we'd love to do it.
Yep, I linked to the issues section for Longhorn, so they can do that.
There you go. That's what I would like to see. If there's demand, we'll do it. We would love to have Longhorn native Windows support. That'd be great.
And we do have it on our. Sorry, we do have it on our roadmap for CSI proxy stuff, which I don't know how Longhorn hooks into CSI, but you know if that's a common thing, then that should get easier.
And when we get community requests like GitHub issues for features, those are very persuasive internally. So rather than having us open that, if you can take the time to open that, it can make a big difference.
If you want to see Windows features, just feel free. Just spam the issues and we'll see it. I agree. Okay, if everybody saw this, maybe it happened a little too quick, but the node came up, and then immediately over here on the registration side of things, you'll see we now have the Windows PowerShell command. So I'm going to copy and paste this one. I'm going to go over here to the EC2 node. Hopefully everyone can see that. I made it very large by demand. Why is that not? There it goes. Okay. A couple of things to note in here as far as this registration command is concerned. You'll notice here that we're putting in an OS label. Our own personal internal OS label. This is a cal.io machine label. So as you see also here, right, cal.io. So we're trying to make sure we differentiate from the UI first. This is a sort of a OS first sort of label that we're using internally to make sure we understand what everything is going on the Rancher side of things. And then the rest of this should look actually pretty familiar. It's just similar cluster tokens. This is just PowerShell stuff. And this is actually an install script that we have right now for Arcade 2. But yeah, and then just this dash worker here at the end. That's what you need. I should be able to hit enter, and it's going to do a bunch of stuff. And we're going to go back over here to machines. We should see a custom node showing up right now. And I don't know if anybody's ever done this from a RDP session. Notice here, by the way, agent service. We do have the native agents, and I will show you that actually physically working. It's pretty fun. And then I'll show you the service itself, so you guys understand how to kind of debug it and troubleshoot it. But no one's ever done through RDP, started a Kubernetes node, you're going to lose connectivity. So give it a second. All right, there goes my connectivity. All right, because when the CNIs boot up, they thrash your RDP connection, and you got to get back in. He's already trying to connect, though. He's already functioning. There it is. All right, reattempting. It usually comes right back up. If it doesn't, I'll be shocked. Oh, it's already running. That didn't take long. All right, and there it is. RK2 get service. Good to go. And then if you go over here to Event Viewer, I just want to just for the Windows admins out there who love Event Viewer, we did in fact pipe all the logs over to the application logs, and you'll see RK2 logs right here. Yeah, there's errors. That's okay. Those things happen. Sure, remote dialer error. And then it refixed itself, so no big deal. But you'll see here, connecting proxy, info logs, etc. If you need anything from the RK2 daemon, it's sitting here inside of Event Viewer. So if you have sort of an event viewer or sort of event logs process today, maybe you ship them off to some other location and then dig through them later, you'll have those. Those will all be available, and it's just the same stuff that we get from the RK2 agent when you boot it. That usually spams standard out. You just obviously grab it and pipe it to event viewer. No big deal. Okay, so as you see here, we have a custom node added here, and it says this ECMA whatever. If I was to click on him, you'll see he's done all the introspection. He is in fact a data center node. So that's it. It's pretty easy. 121.3 here. Good to go. All right, so let's go over to my other cluster. So this one is actually running locally in my home lab, and I did that so I could have more control over it. So just so you understand what you're looking at. Let's go over here to the cluster itself and look at the nodes. So I have one server node, control plane etcd. I added a worker node by itself because I'm about to deploy a custom application that Jamie wrote, which is a demonstration.NET application, which will boot up a SQL Server, which we're going to put on the Linux container for SQL Server. We're going to put that on the Linux node. And then we're going to put the ASP.NET application on the Windows node. This kind of demonstrates how you can do sort of pod networking, cluster networking, and have this hybrid Windows and Linux cluster all functioning together. So if you need a Linux service, you can pop in a Linux worker. You need the Windows application or a Windows service, you can pop in the Windows worker. That's how this should be. It should be a nice hybrid environment. Now, if we go into here, I'm going to import some YAMLs. Grab it up here. This is my, we have a link you probably can see in the slides. We're still upgrading some things. This full demo is actually supposed to be a traffic demo that we're doing on Thursday at another meetup. So we just have an Nginx version here, but you'll see some things in here like traffic, et cetera, but it doesn't actually work because we're doing Nginx on here. But I've imported this, and I would like to talk about it while it's working in the background. This is actually pretty cool and kind of demonstrates sort of how you can run your apps and what we were talking about earlier with node selectors. Right here is how we're doing that. We have the affinity, node affinity, and we then start matching expressions for the Kubernetes IO/OS label. If you go back here into the UI, you click on this and you just edit it as YAML, you will see a whole bunch of annotations up here and a whole bunch of labels right here. And you'll see Kubernetes.io. These are all the ones that are added by Kubelet. When he boots up, he checks the box for what he is, and you can see he's already identified him as an AMD 64 Windows box. So this is, as far as we've seen, always been there in Kubernetes. You might have some old versions that skipped it, but probably not using old versions of Kubernetes if you're doing Windows anyway. So this is pretty consistent, and we've been using those as targeters ever since they were consistent. And you can see how you could just target this label for Windows, Kubernetes IO, Linux. And if we scroll down here, this is a service for the application, which is the .NET application. And you'll see here that we're targeting it IOOS, and we're targeting it for Windows. So when you're building out, if you're building out, let's say you're building out deployment YAMLs, you can just do basic stuff like this. If you're building out a Helm chart, you could actually have more fun. You could do more dynamic, like did they select Windows and then add in the selectors, or did they choose, to only do Linux and then just only do those? So you can do more, things based on your values YAML. You have the person who uses your chart make some decisions for themselves. And I'm hoping one day, there's a lot of talk about, IBM Z and a bunch of other things, and I'm hoping that we start seeing some more operating systems and things showing up in architectures. It'd be more fun. They're obviously already supporting it, and they start doing some cross compiles for things. We'll probably start seeing some more stuff. Okay, so and this is just the ingress. So I'm going to grab this and let's see if our app booted. So I'm just using slip, just faking it. You can see here it's just a local address, which is the Windows. No, this is the Linux node actually, because the Linux node is. Hey-o, there it is. That worked. I had it over here too, which is 404 before, and here's your app. So, yeah, that worked great. That looks awesome. Let's go look at what we actually have with that. We're going to go to our pods, and you're going to see we have, am I in the right cluster? I am. I'm sure. There they are. Okay, so yeah, they're in default. You'll see we have 2 pods running. There's 2 deployments to run 2 pods, right? And then if we look at these, you'll see one's on Worker, which is the Linux node, and this is on the Windows. And obviously, since an ASP.NET application is serving this, you can see that that's exactly where that has to be.
So I would point out that the container being ran here, the image, is only built for Windows Server 2019.
Correct.
Or AKA Nano Server 1809 and pushed up. So if you're going to deploy this yourself, you need to deploy a 2019 host, or you can build the container yourself for whichever version you want to target.
There you go.
This also comes into something that we do. If you poke around in our repositories, is you could build, since this is .NET Core, you could theoretically build for Linux and Windows, and then produce a manifest so you can deploy it on whatever node it wants to be scheduled on. So this gets into some of the nuances of Windows containers or things that are cross-platform. But just be aware that that's what's happening here. So.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that shows you, here, watch this. This is just so, again, new UI, it's kind of fun. We have this little drop-down thing down here. You can see the app here booting up. I guess tray, what do people call these days? I don't even know. View logs here. You'll see this is your SQL Server starting up. And if I'm motivated, I actually could probably, here, let's boot up an execute shell. So now I'm inside of the container for the database, the MS SQL database. I'm going to go over here to Service Discovery, go to Services. I'm going to go to this. Hopefully this works. Let's just do a wget 1043 192. There you go. So 200 OK. He can talk to his buddy over here, which is the application. So this is demonstrating the MS SQL database communicating with the cluster IP for the app. And there you go. And you can see the app running right here. So good to go. Okay.
And if you have the question of why we're running SQL Server on Linux, Microsoft only produces MS SQL Server containers for Linux.
Correct.
There are no Windows. So if you want to containerize a SQL Server database, realize that you'll be running that on Linux.
All right, let's roll into some questions. I can always reshare and show my screen again if people want to see the UI. Love to know what people thought about the new UI, what people think about booting up our K2 clusters in general.
Cool. So I got a couple of questions over here. I was hoping to save this one for last, but it's got a couple of upvotes. So I'm just going to shoot it. From the new features, what was the most complex to accomplish, and what is the team most proud of, regardless of how difficult the implementation was?
I'm pretty proud of how well we did getting K3s and RK2, compiling, working, functional, Calico installation. Like that stuff's not easy. Like we were going in, for instance, let's give a quick example. We really wanted to have almost all of our installation process in native Go code. And, you know, Calico had a bunch of stuff that was PowerShell, which had to just get more migrated, imported. So we tried to make things easy. Like we wanted to make everything in the same place. And we really took time and effort to get that process, you know, solid. And I'm very proud of it. It boots really nicely. It's a great little solid Windows service. And we're just working on improving it now. Like it's kind of our little baby here, right? I'm just trying to make it work.
Yeah. Awesome.
I just wanted to add how proud I am of our brand new team who came together to make this tech preview work. And we're continuing to iterate and respond to community feedback and build out new features. And I'm just so proud of Luther, Ross, and Jamie and your work you've done here, and the community who have already started reporting bugs and submitting feedback. We wanted to have the session to raise the visibility of this feature in tech preview, because we want you to go out and try it and give us the feedback and file bug reports so we can continue to improve upon it.
I gotta make a huge shout out to Rui Lopez, who was probably the first guy submitting issues for Windows on Arcade 2. That guy's here. There he is. Attaboy. Appreciate it, man.
Cool. And there were a couple of links that were shared earlier. So if you haven't seen those yet, we'll repaste them in the chat so you can check that out as well, and you can get started with this. Going to move on to the next question. Are there any glaring limitations running Windows container workloads on hosted clusters like GKE and EKS? Are there any issues to be mindful of in terms of configuring the underlying nodes?
Anybody got a good answer for that one?
Yes. You are at the whim of EKS, GKE, AKS in terms of networking options and choices and how their platform works.
Yeah.
So we give you the option of Calico. I don't know the Windows support. I know AKS didn't offer Calico at the time. It was Kubernetes only. I think that's changed recently. But just realize that you're kind of at their choice of what they want to support and implement. Just like if you use RK2 and you want Windows, you kind of have to use Calico right now. Of course, we would all like that to be no restriction on CNI support, but the CNI has to support Windows, right? So, those platforms are going to focus on supporting the CNIs that they want to support, that they feel like they can support. So that's going to be the glaring thing. And then also knowing what OS options you have. Like, I don't think AKS lets you use 20H2. I might be misspeaking there. I haven't looked in probably 6 months. But, you might be stuck on having to do 2019 only, right? Or you might have to be upgrading to a certain version. So you're going to have those kind of things kind of chosen for you, but that's using the cloud, right? They're going to make a lot of decisions, so you don't have to worry about it. But then you're beholden to those decisions. So while we try to support all these versions of Windows and we try to support different CNIs and CSIs, you don't have those options in the cloud. So that's the things you're going to have to kind of be aware of. If there's something you have to have, like network policies. Calico has network policies. We produce Canal to do flannel with network policies. I know Azure has certain network policy implementations, but that's not true of every cloud provider. So just keep that in mind too, that if you have hard requirements for network policies, then make sure the provider is using a CNI for Windows that allow you to use a network policy.
Fantastic. That is very useful info. We got 2 more questions here. I'm going to take the other person's question before mine. So, want to learn more about the direction to acknowledge my best practices for Windows containers. Learning more about my best practices. So I think the question is really just focused on, learning best practices for Windows containers. Are there, particular resources or material that people can go to?
Those guys all bombed him they all link bombed him right there with a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
And frankly, the best thing is to just start doing it. And then when you run into some things and you bump your head against things, just make sure you write it down. Make sure you remember. That's for us. It's really been a lot of trial and error and getting stuff right. And then we just do it right from then on. Right. So it's hard to explain, but you come into, there's literally been times that we've been on a customer call and we were like, this is weird, should be working. And then a kernel patch comes out and the network starts working. You're like, oh, thanks, Microsoft. So just things like that happen. They do happen, I promise you.
I would say Windows containers are a subset of Linux containers. There are some differences, but any best practices for containerizing an application, doing a Docker file or a Docker build, any of those things are all good. And you need to know. You need to know how Docker works, how it builds images, and how they layer things, and then start implementing that stuff in Windows with what can be supported. So, for example, you can't build Windows containers with the BuildX stuff with the newer Docker APIs. So BuildKit, I mean, so you don't get that kind of a capability, but you can still do multi-stage container builds, right? To make your container small, fewer layers. Other best practices would be also like standardizing on a Windows version. Like if you can get by with 2019 or just 2022 and not use an SAC, then you'll share all those common layers that are pre-pulled down on all your hosts, which will make your downloads faster, right? Because you don't have to pull all those base image layers from Windows. So, standardizing on Nano Server or Server Core or whichever container size makes the sense with the most shared base layers, because then when you pull, it'll be faster and you'll save some time there on your deployments. So it's things like that but that's really no different than understanding how containers are built for Linux and how to optimize. So there's just more nuances because you're tied to a version with Windows, right? That's the big thing to kind of keep in mind.
Fantastic. Awesome. Thanks a lot, Jamie. All right. And the last question is, since Windows-based images are significantly larger than Linux-based images, are there any additional tips when it comes to dealing with security vulnerabilities apart from running image scans?
I'm not convinced that the size has any more vulnerabilities than, it's going to be because really the size is dictated by the extra kernel bits and pieces that they embed for you. So I don't think that actually intrinsically means more security vulnerabilities just because of the size of the image. Do your normal things, do your scanning, do your checks on the code, like do your, we use FOSSA for our stuff now and just do stuff like that. Like if you want to make sure you're not, in CVE world, make sure you have someone telling you that. That's probably ideal.
I would also say, think of a strategy for rebuilding your images for your apps to get the updated base images, right? Like I know a lot of people build it, it runs, it works, they don't touch it, right? And unless you're rebuilding it with the newer base image, you're not getting patches and fixes into your container. So, you have to kind of plan that out. Are you doing a good job doing Windows patches right now? Like on Windows Server, then, you're going to have to follow some stuff like that.
That's a good valid point. Let me also extrapolate on that. When we do our build pipelines, we do everything in AWS. They have a pretty decent, large pile of AMIs that you can use. And they update them constantly. So what you can do is you can just we use Terraform and just do a splat and just say, I want this version, and then whatever version, date, I don't care, just give me the latest one. So it'll have all the patches, everything be done for you. Things like that. Like then when you recycle out a build host, for instance, you'll get the latest, greatest stuff, everything will be patched, everybody will be happy. So things like that, I guess, yeah.
Fantastic. All right, and that's all our questions. Going to give it 10 seconds or a little bit more than that just to see if there's any more that are going to sneak in, any last minute entries. In the meantime, while we're giving it a few seconds for any additional questions, please do check out the polls. The last one has just become visible, and that is just an opportunity for you to give some feedback on how you found the session. I think it was fantastic. But please do let us know. At the end of the day, we're trying to find the best way of providing high quality material and content for you. Remember, once again, this fits within the Cloud Native series. This is the third part, and I think it's the perfect way to wrap up the cluster management at scale dimension. Check out the previous two parts of the series, and the third one will be available for you to watch as well, either on demand, which you can access over here on Crowdcast, or on YouTube. It will be uploaded there as well. Okay, so I'm not seeing any new questions, which is totally fine, because this Thursday we're going to be having our dedicated Q&A session, which has now been renamed to Bring It On with Luke. It was previously office hours, but it works the exact same way. And I'm sure you can probably guess that on this Thursday, we will have some special guests from this team, so you can bombard them with all your questions. There's going to be a challenge that's going out tomorrow, giving you the opportunity to replicate some of the things that Luther was actually demonstrating. And if you run into any issues, Thursday would be a great opportunity for you to ask those questions as well. Once again, to Ross, Luther, Hayden, and Jamie, awesome work. Thank you so much for making yourselves available. This was fantastic. Really enjoyed the session. To everyone, please remember that you can join the SUSE and Rancher community if you haven't already done so. There's a big green button right at the bottom. Trying to do this stuff in isolation is hard. I hope you've been inspired by the fact that you're seeing a team on the call. And I think they would all attest to the fact that working with other people made it a lot easier. And so in similar fashion, if you join the community, you'd be able to collaborate with other cloud native practitioners who can help you in the journey, even not just in the case of working with Windows-based containers, but Kubernetes at large, and trying to do this at scale as well. So please do join us over there. That way you'll be able to actually have visibility of the challenge as well. To everyone, wherever you are, whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening, please enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much for joining the session. To the team, again, thank you so much. And congratulations on the epic milestones and the great work. From me to all of you, goodbye.